How you doing, guys? This is JP Sarri once again coming to you again with another book review, and this time around I have another omnibus, in this case a DC omnibus, and I'm gonna talk about the Death and Return of Superman. It's the same omnibus, it just reprinted, that came out back in 2013 to celebrate the 20th anniversary. There has been two omnibuses of this story. Containing the stories. The first one was back in 2006, celebrating the 15th anniversary. It was incomplete. It has a lot of incomplete parts from some of those comics that were missing. A lot of people complain about also the binding. There were some issues with that book. But this one is better. It has more concise. It contains more stories. A much better quality book. It's very nice looking at even the size. I think the size was different. The other was like deluxe size. It's an omnibus size, so it's a little larger. But still, even though it has all of it, it still has also a little flaws, and we will talk about those flaws when we get there. Like I said, this is a reprint. It's a very large book, as you can see. Definitely, it's very large. It contains a lot of art. It's very quality. I like the high quality of this. In many cases, sometimes the books from DC, unless they're the absolutes. Most of the books there, they have some issues with the binding, but this one has a good binding. This is a Dan Jurgens new cover. Definitely, as you can see right there, the Death of Superman omnibus. Definitely like it. And as you can see, the epic event that shocked a nation and changed Superman forever. It has the same art in this case the cover, this case the hardcover, the same art of, in this case, the dust jacket, of course without the lettering. I definitely love it. I really love the way he Dan did this. It's very colorful, very epic. And as you can see, the Death and Return of Superman, definitely fantastic book. It opens well. Here you can see people that are involved in here. You can see these are the writers. It's Dan Jurgens, Carl, Kesel, Jerry Ordway. Those are the main writers. It's Louise Simonson, the wife of Walt Simonson, also known as Guice Simonson, and Roger Stern, very prolific artist, very famous artist, writer of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Dennis Janke, Willem Messer, and they're in smaller roles in the Legacy of Superman. You're gonna right there, and then you see the art, and especially you have John Bogdanove, Tom Grummett, Jackson Guice, Dan Jurgens, also was a writer, but also there was some his own art with Dennis. Dennis Rodder, and you see more people. Walt Simonson does a small part in the Legacy of the Superman. Kurt Swan, M.D. Bright, and then you see a lot of inkers and people involved into the process. Introduction by Mike Carlin. He was the editor-in-chief. One thing I can say about this, what I don't like about this omnibus in comparison to the Marvel omnibuses, here's the introduction by Mike Carlin. Very fun to read. I think it's important. In this introduction, he explains how things were developed, how they worked together as a team, because during that time, actually, the Superman comic team, there were 4 different Superman comic books during that time in print. You see Adventures of Superman, the Man of Steel. You also have the regular Superman and Action Comics. So they were produced at the same time, but even though they were produced by different writers and artists, they were under the same editor. And Mike decided to keep all the team together so they can create stories together. So here's an intro, and it explains what was happening, the reason why they were doing the stories. And it's definitely a very fun read. I like Mike and the way he expressed the things and how they envision this whole story. And of course, the only thing I don't like about this is that it does not have a table of contents like you see in the Marvel omnibuses. Definitely Marvel does a much better job to create, to give you that information about the table of content and the page count and where you can find this and that. You don't see that in this one. So that's a shame. That's the only thing that I don't like about this one. But besides that, I think the art itself, all the stuff contained, is very well organized, and we're going to go in detail. Here, these are the most famous intros to this story of the Death of Superman. This was introduced, and do you see 4 different panels? This is one panel, another panel, and another panel. This actually came in separate, different comic books that are not complete here. This was the last page of this comic book, an introduction to what will be the Death of Superman. So this is an introduction. As you can see right there, these are famous, but they're still famous, and they're all contained. These are just as last pages for this last comics that will be, in this case, Man of Steel 17. You also have Superman 73 and Adventure Superman 496, and you also have Action Comics number 683. All those were from October 1992, and this is the initial. I can see Superman the Man of Steel. And it was written in this case by Louise Simonson and John Bogdanove. He was the artist. Definitely, this is a very famous cover. There are some covers here that are extremely popular up to this day because of the stories contained, of course. And it goes into it. The four comics were running alongside. I was a teenager during this time when I read these comics. And as a teenager, the idea of having Superman dead was definitely one that a lot of people were like skeptical because, to that moment, we had some deaths in comic books. Of course, Stacy Wynn, and there were other important deaths, but never of a main character. And the fact that now an important character, in this case of the comic book, and the center of the story, in this case the center of the comic book, was being killed, definitely create an impact. And of course, there was a lot of feedback. There was a lot of people talking about it. Even media got involved. You saw it in the news. People were really talking about the whole thing. And then, of course, it's Justice League of America, also part of and this contained in the beginning. Definitely was a lot of it, and this is Dan Jurgens. I definitely like Dan Jurgens. I think definitely Dan Jurgens was a pillar in the whole creation of the story, and a lot of people remember a lot of the Death of Superman art. They're gonna remember this. Of course, they're different artists, so you're gonna see different type of art. Definitely love Dan, the way he does expressions in the face. Here you can see this, a Blue Beetle being grabbed by Doomsday. Definitely, he looks terrified there, and definitely, there's a lot of it. And against Superman Doomsday, also still Dan Jurgens is a very famous image. I love the way Dan does faces, and especially female faces. And what I like about Dan Jurgens is I like the way he portrayed, in this case, Doomsday. As you can see right here, he was a terrifying character. Just look at it, how powerful he was. He really translated that power of the character on the paper. As you can see, he's beating right here the Justice League Booster Gold, and also Superman. He is a machine. And definitely a machine, a powerful powerhouse. And look at it, and of course, Dan Jurgens sometimes uses more classical panels. This is the 9 panel. Of course, here there's more than 9. There's 12 panels here. There's a classical panel layout. And then he turns into a little more widescreen, the layout. So Dan does everything, he does a lot of things. He changes a little bit, makes it a little entertaining. Definitely, I think then he was good at it. This expression, you can see that face, that anger. He's angry, right there. Superman is upset. Definitely, this is the highlight of this book. And I can see this is Grummett, and I love Grummett's covers. Actually, I love the way he does that. Grummett, if you're gonna follow this, I love the way Grummett does a lot of things. I love this, a lot of action, and you're gonna look at it. It's one of my favorite layouts. Definitely from all the collection, I like Dan Jurgens, but actually. Tom Grummett was my favorite artist of the bunch. He did the Adventures of Superman. He definitely knew how to inject energy into the pages, and you can see that the more we go. He does the splash pages like this one, the cover. They really see. You see the curvy lines. That was called. This is called something that a lot of artists use just to portray movement. And it gives a dramatic flair to things. And definitely. I love it. I love the way he did it. I definitely like the way he portrays characters a lot better than I think Bogdanove. And there's a lot of lively images. He experiment. He does a lot of the newer '90s stuff, like stuff that were in the '90s, the different panels, the little bigger panels, and he shows a lot of detail. And definitely one of my favorite parts here is when he's coming out of the water. Just phenomenal. When you see the onomatopoetic words, that's a big word. But what it means is that you see the sounds. It resembles the sounds. It writes down the big sounds. And a lot of comics, use that. Of course, you always see that. Here you can see it. Definitely, I like Grummett. I think definitely Grummett was the best artist of the bunch, and followed by Dan Jurgens. Of course, Dan Jurgens was the one that got to draw the most important events, and the actual death and some other areas. And as you can see right there, like I told you before, he does these big panels, Grummett. These are big white panels. Of course, there's color in the background, but there's big words, and things like that to resemble sound. During that time, all under, in this case, Carlin, all the teams were working. They were planning to finally marry, in this case, Clark Kent with Lois Lane. That was the plan. But during that time, also a show came on TV. In this case, As you remember, this case Lewis and Clark, very famous show in the 90s of Superman. I was a fan also, like many people during that time. So DC decided that it was not in good interest to have two different worldviews, in the sense of, you see in the comic books, you see a married Superman, and then in the stories of the show, TV show, he's not married. So they decided that it was not in interest. They wanted to keep everything at least together or tied together. So they say, you know what, let's just not do that. Let's just have a different story. And of course, this is Bogdanove. Sometimes Bogdanove I like this. He's more cartoony. He has that feel in his art, and sometimes it's good. I like this expression with Superman, where he's angry, hitting Doomsday. But there are times when I don't like it, and I'm going to point out some of those mistakes when I found them. Things that I feel like. One of the things that Bogdanove did a lot is that, he also, I can say he can fault him for a lot of the 90s mistakes or 90s flaws, so all the guilts of the 90s. One of them is just a big body and a very small head. Something that a lot of people, especially those that grew up in the prior eras, they did not appreciate. They felt that it was not a good way to express body. And you can see right here, you can see Doomsday has such a big body compared to his face, to his head, and Superman has the same thing. This is one famous now, and I'll still remember to this day the first time I saw it, when in this case Doomsday hits Supergirl in the face and pretty much destroys her face, to the point that she goes back to the alien form. But I like this expression here, what he does here. Oh, definitely, it's very good. I like that. Bogdanove had some good moments. I'm not gonna deny it. And he was famous. He did all Superman for many years. Pretty much did a lot of DC stuff for years. But definitely there are moments where I felt that he was not as good. Of course, every artist has his own style. Some are more consistent than others. And of course, this is the number 75. This is the death of Superman. And you can see Dan Jurgens and Brett Breeding doing the inking part. And Dan Jurgens, he goes all out with this. He goes all out. He does the big splash pages. Just one panel. And definitely some are excellent. And some are, it might be a little criticized by some people. But definitely, these are the most famous images that people remember of the death of Superman. Definitely, you can see that. He really translated the whole event into this big print, and explain the splash pages entirely, and you can see the dramatic flair. You see the lines to create the movement. This is a to this day, very famous image, very well known, and these are the most recognized actions. Fighting in Metropolis, in front of the Daily Planet, and as you can see, he's Doomsday gets pounding Superman, giving him a run for his money. And definitely they are in a situation of what's going to happen. He does that. Dan Jurgens, he wanted to make a splash like that. He wanted to do something like that for years, and he was able to do it in this. That's in the interviews, people talking. You mentioned it. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to do a full-out war when somebody beat Superman to the pulp, and he did. He was able to present that in this splash, and this is the most recognized, most famous comic book in the whole series. And of course, as you can see right here, we're still very short. This is just a death of Superman, and then it goes on, and of course he gets killed. And you can see this part, very famous up to now. Lois Lane holding the body of Superman after he gets killed in the battle with Doomsday, and definitely famous to this day. The only thing that I'm missing, like I said, there's missing some stuff. Here are missing, and one of them is, it goes from here, for the Death of Superman, it goes straight to The Adventures of Superman, His Funeral for a Friend #1, also known as The World Without Superman. But it's missing, and a lot of people are going to point out online, and this is the one that most people think is the only one missing, but there's others. But one of the most important ones that is missing here, and I think for some reason they didn't do it, and I felt that was the stupidest thing, is Justice League of America number 70. That's actually called also Funeral for a Friend. And that would be probably Funeral for a Friend number 0. But this is missing. It's important. It shows the aftermath. While this is dealing with in this case, the comic book of Superman, the Adventures of Superman, and dealing with the death of Superman and how he's affecting everybody else because of the body and people involved. The other one presents the aspect from the perspective of the Justice League. What they're seeing they're there at the same time that this is happening. They're running along. So definitely the fact that it's not here is a little disappointing. Actually, you can find that comic, and if you want a more complete listing of things. I'm going to have that in the description. I'm going to have a listing of those that are missing, but also I'm going to give you a description, because even though this is the omnibus, it is the most complete up to now, to this day, of all the omnibuses, so the big edition sizes, you can actually find a more complete collection of all the ones are missing on the trade, in the newer trade paperbacks, but also in the digital versions. And I'm going to have links to it for all the ones that are interested. But here you can see this Grummett. Love Grummett's art. Like I said, I really love the way he did it. He was, in my opinion, one of the best artists for Superman in the 90s. Definitely love his art style, definitely loves his energy, definitely loves the way he portrays the characters. And Supergirl Action Comics, to resemble the first Superman, the full Action Comics, with Superman was involved. It's just kind of like a, play homage to it. And of course, it's Jackson Guice, which is not one of my favorites, but hey, you know what? He got some good moments too. And then it goes, a lot of people do not like the death of Superman, of the funeral for a friend storyline, because they say it's the slowest part. And it is. It's this one of the slowest. Also missing from this is the news time, The Life and Death of Superman, that was also printed, and I'm gonna print it at the same time of The Legacy of Superman. It was not printed here, and it shows like what the newspaper, in this case the Daily Planet, decides to write down as a cover of what The Legacy of Superman and what he meant. But as you can see, the Funeral for a Friend, it continues. It's said, it's seven of them should be here, and it goes, and of course it talks about the impact that it has, that we don't have Superman anymore. It creates that Bogdanove. Some parts is good, some part is bad. It really presents the impact, not only in the comic with Superman, but also in the entire DC universe, in this case for a lot of these characters. So it was a nice touch. It was a difficult time, let's put it this way. Like I said before, here's from Superman, also a really nice cover by Jurgens with the whole Justice League, not only Justice League of America, but the whole the main Justice League. We have never seen nothing like this before. Yeah, we saw people dying in comics, but never a main character. So a lot of people were disconcerted about the whole thing. There was an idea, of course, a lot of people say, well, Superman is going to come back, and of course he had to come back. But the idea of not having it was difficult for a lot of teenagers that were reading comics at the time, and I was one of them. It's like trying to understand and see the impact, how the lives are affected by it. And it has its soapy moments. I'm not gonna tell you that it doesn't. It doesn't play out well after so many years. I'm an adult now. I'm older, so I feel like some of these parts are so melodramatic. But definitely, for that time, as seen from the perspective of a teenager, yes, it had an impact on a lot of people. And actually, this is Walt Simonson and Legacy of Superman. I love Walt Simonson. He did a mini part of that. There was different artists working on it. You can see that's Walt Simonson face all through. You can see the difference in the art. Even though there were different artists, and there's other artists, and this is Legacy of Superman, this is the Gangbuster, definitely a cool character of that time. But there were some scenes where you're going to see, like in this case, Luthor, where he goes from one comic book to the next. He has a crutch. He is walking. He got hurt, and so he's walking with a cast. And now, you realize this: how in the world that happened doesn't explain it. And actually, it's because it's missing another comic, and that's Supergirl and Team Luthor #1. That is also known as Supergirl and Team Luthor Special. That's the feature of Metropolis. You can find that on the trade paperbacks, on the digital versions, but you cannot find it, like it's not included here. So there's some missing parts with Rider. There's parts where you can see where some characters are here and you don't know where they come from. You don't know exactly why they're here. And that's something that I feel that they should explain better, and the only way to do it, to know Wave Rider was here also, is just to know, you have to know what happened prior to this comic, to this storyline. Of course, a lot of people are going to feel like, fish out of the water if you don't know what's happening. So I know a lot of people, especially the ones that are going to buy this omnibus, are the ones that remember the time, the ones that read the comic book, they're familiar with the storyline, and they're the ones that are going to get into it more than the newer readers. Well, in this part, you can see Lois Lane. She's trying to recover the body of the, in this case of Superman from the Cadmus Project headquarters, and she's held by some of the Underworlders, but also she's held by the Legion, the Newsboy Legion. But when I see this design, this green design, the first thing I think about is Kick-Ass. I think about it. In my opinion, I wouldn't be surprised if this was the inspiration taken to create the character, as you can see right there. and that's just Lois Lane. But just the design, definitely, there's some inspiration there. And of course, comic books take inspiration. Every time I look at it, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Here's just Grummett again, and this shows the adventures when there is a dream, actually, when actually Mr. Kent, the father of Clark Kent, he gets, Jonathan Kent hits a heart attack, and in that heart attack he goes pretty much into kind of like a heaven, and then he talks to his son, and of course he goes into that. Here I love that gang buster. Definitely Grummett did a fantastic job portraying him here. So it really shows into that. It goes into depth into a lot of things, and of course it is not as bad thing. You know, I love it. I love the way he does. I love this art. There's a lot of differences. It's definitely can be convoluted for some. Some might think that it's a lot of information, a lot of things that some people might not really enjoy as much. But definitely there is Steel, John Irons, Man of Steel, definitely a character that also was part of it. And of course Danny was inspiration for the movie with Shaquille O'Neal, definitely not a good movie. Eradicator, that became one of the Supermans also, the 4 main Supermans that we will see in the reign of Superman. I think we're already into the reign of Superman, and this is Superboy, also introduced by Grummett, and all of that goes into it. And the reign of Superman, of course, here you can see Born Again. There's a lot of introductions. Cyborg Superman, definitely a really bad looking muffo, definitely very good, and it goes in. I think reign of Superman, it's one of the best. It pickets the pace, you can see that, but also can be a little convoluted. None of these are the real Superman, of course, but I'm not going to explain to you what's happening in the story. I'm sure that you'll know, or you know some of it, and it really goes that. Bogdanove, I think Bogdanove, he was the creator of Steel. Like I said, sometimes Bogdanove is good, and I like it the way he designs Steel. I like his design, and he did a good job with it. I think it really fit the bill well with this type of character. Not necessarily with Superman, but he did well there. And this is Rabbit, that's the villain. And here, of course, this is Grummett again. Love this scene with Superboy holding this girl, with no problem. If you're a fan of the 90s, you're gonna love this. If you're not a fan of the 90s at all, then you're gonna have problems with this, and you're not gonna like it, because it really has a lot of the good things of the 90s, but also a lot of the flaws of the 90s. And it's very prevalent in these pages. But from a historical standpoint, I think this has created an effect, a real powerful effect in the life of Superman and the character of Superman in the DC universe. It affected that. To me, is something that it has to be pre-Death of Superman and post-Death of Superman that define what the comics are now today. A lot of the comics today are defined by these events, and these events, like with Batman, with the Nightfall, they're defined by Nightfall. A lot of the things that are happening with Superman are defined by the Death of Superman and the Return of Superman, and for good and bad. This is a very famous cover. Dan Jurgens, really Cyber holding the American flag, and it really goes into detail of something with Cyber gets, he is able to kind of lie to people, or fake to people, saying that he's a real Superman because he saves the president, in this case Bill Clinton, and we'll see that in a moment. He is able to stop a terrorist attack on the life of the president, so he gets the government thinks he is the real Superman. Of course, later on we'll find out here's Bill Clinton. Of course, this is 90s, so you're gonna see that a lot of the of the throwbacks to it, and of course Bill Clinton holding the hand of Cyborg, Supergirl, and of course boy meets girl. So you can see all of this. Definitely Superboy. I will be in the same position of Superboy if I see Supergirl in front of me. I'll be like, whoa, I wouldn't be able to talk. But definitely you can see that. The art, the way he does, like I said, Grummett did a very fantastic job when it comes to the way he expositioned his art, the way he presented the art. Some people might not like it, of course. If you're not a fan of the 90s, you're not going to like it. But if you're a fan, you're going to see the big pluses. The light, in this case, was on top of Marvel Comics. Everybody was talking about Marvel Comics. You see the big names in Marvel Comics. DC was struggling to maintain supremacy in the market. They have a lot of stories, they have a lot of books, they have a lot of different teams, they have a lot of comics, like Superman had 4 different comics, but they were not competing at the same level of the X-Men, or in this case the Spider-Man, under and Todd McFarlane, or even the X-Force, and all these characters, the X-Men. Marvel was really having the upper hand. So trying to figure out some ideas where we're able to compete. As in that moment, this became a really powerful marketing tool. And killing Superman was definitely the way that they can sway attention to DC in a big way, and they did. It became a bestseller right away, a New York Times bestseller. It really did well during that time. But they didn't know how to do it. They didn't know what to do. So in this case, if I'm not mistaken, Dan Jurgens says, why we do not kill Superman. Every time they have issues, one of the comments, and you're going to see that in the introduction, every time something was not working well, when they're trying to come up with ideas, it's always then will say, let's just kill Superman. That's a joke. But according to this, reading in through the introduction, you can see that one moment he said, let's just kill Superman. And everybody thought about it and said, you know what? Let's just do it. Let's just kill him. So they decided to come with the idea, and of course, they plan everything, and these writers and all the artists involved in the process, everybody involved decided to kill Superman. And of course, this took like fire. It really went off to the point that some people were fans of the whole idea, some people were like against of the whole idea. Of course, there was a controversy, like there's always going to be controversy, especially with comic books and stories, when things have major things shift, the storylines. And but the idea stick, and it really paid off in the end. So they decided to kill him, and of course, once they did the killing part, they said, well, what are we going to do now? Now he's dead. We want to bring him back because we have to, but how are we going to do it? So that developed into the funeral of Superman, and also the reign of the Superman. They were saying, let's just bring 4 different Supermans and trying to figure out what to do with this 4 Supermen and see what people choose, who's the one to be the Superman. There was an idea of choosing. People have to choose their best. And of course, the idea was always to bring the original Superman at some point, but how you do it. The death of Superman also represents the death of an era for me for comic books. I think the Superman after this is totally different than the Superman that it was. It's still, there's some sense of that the Superman is still naive in many aspects. He has done a lot of universe traveling. He has confronted many characters. There have been good stories, but I don't think many Superman stories, in my opinion, now stick as good as what this was. Yes, All-Star Superman has his moments, and I liked it, but definitely to me, Superman has always been this Superman, at least. And after that, many changes happened. Of course, there's the Justice League, Superman of Steel, Bogdanove. Definitely, I like this actually cover of Bogdanove. It's not bad, not at all. And it goes in, of course, after that is the Return of Superman. As you can see, this is very 90s. A lot of stuff going on here. Some people loved it, some people don't. But definitely it is of it, it's part of it, and anybody that grew up in the 90s will feel familiar in this ground. I think every era has a different style, and people get accustomed to it. I'm a follower. I love comics from all different eras, but I have my favorite ones. Of course, 90s has a special part in my heart because I grew up in the 90s. I grew up in the 80s. But also a teenager in the 90s. I also was part of the early 90s in the comic book industry, on the big boom of comics. So definitely, those are my favorite eras. Like here's Bogdanove, and I love this one, Bogdanove. You can see Superman. He looks fantastic here, right next to Steel. Love it, And there's a comeback. Superman comes back. Of course, he's depowered. He has no powers. He's going to gain, by the end, some power. So he's going to be able to confront, in this case, Cyborg, the Superman Cyborg, who is actually the villain in the end of this story. There was also a comic, video game, very famous during that time, that was done by Super Nintendo, and also for the Sega Genesis. Oh, that video game was fantastic. I love the video game. It was good. And it follows this, the Death and Return of Superman. Of course, I love this. Definitely very good. This is MD Bright, and this is actually from the Green Lantern. As you can see right there, this is the only, there are a lot of effects that happen after this. I love this splash. I think MD Bright was good with when he was drawing Green Lantern. You can see Green Lantern battling Muggle. Definitely, I love it. I really love how MD Bright did fantastic work with this one. I love his panel layout. Definitely very 90s, but definitely very bright and powerful, and very nice. And again, see the reign is over. Reign of Superman. This is the last comic book of that one, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, it comes with a high note. Superman gets powerful again, and he's able to win and become Superman again. Clark Kent, Kal-El becomes Superman. So I'm going to go fast now, of course, because we are coming to the end. I don't want to go through the stories. And then he becomes Superman, and definitely love this panel. This is Dan Jurgens, and here you can see Grummett again. Then, you know, Superman goes and meets Louise Lane. Definitely, it really explains a lot of things. There's explanation why he's able to return. And love it here. This is Guice. Actually, I like this cover from Guice. It's a pretty good cover. Like I said, I'm not a fan of much of the stuff he did, but some of the stuff he did was good. Like every artist, they have their moments, and some are better than others. And actually, I like this, what he did here on this in this specific comic book. He did pretty good. You know, it wasn't bad. It was very the human features are very well defined. And he did pretty good. Now, when you go to the end, one thing is missing here, and I feel bad that they didn't include it. Like I said, there's other things that there's things that they can pass, but things that they cannot pass. And Superman number 83 number 83 is not here. That's also known as Superman on the Edge, but it's actually known as The Funeral for a Friend epilogue. This is the last, definitely pinpoint the end of Superman, and it's not here. They did not include it, so definitely sad because it's still considered part of Funeral for a Friend, and it should have been included here. This should be the last, actually the last page, the last comic book included. It's not here. Some other covers, Cyborg. You can see John Bogdanove Steel. Also, you have the Eradicator. That's Guy's art, and this is Grummett, with Superboy. You got some covers, well, without Superman. You have the Return of Superman. These are really the covers of the trade paperbacks that were created for that. I can see this is Jurgens, big nice cover. This is the Death of Superman, the Funeral for Superman, and this is a very famous, really very famous cover here. And then it's a little interview. It's little talks about Dan Jurgens, Louise Simonson. It's a little information of them. These are actually, they were art that was Dan Jurgens created for some t-shirts. And there's another art. This is Jerry Ordway. This is actually illustration of Dan Jurgens. Very nice too. And there's more Louise Simonson. There's some more information about her. You can see some of the art from Jurgens. And of course the Eradicator. There's not many extras. It's something that I can say that I'm not a fan of. For me, one aspect of the comics that is missing here, and I'm gonna have the list for you in the description, it's also one that is Superman Doomsday, and actually you can get that, I think, if not the trade paperback, but also you can get in this case the digital version. And what it does, it has Year One Doomsday, annual number 1. That one really explains the origins of Doomsday, because you're never going to see the origins of Doomsday here. It's not going to tell you why. It's going to concentrate only on his death and the return of Superman. And then you got Doomsday Wars that explain a lot of things concerning Doomsday, and also Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey. Those are another 6 issues. You can start 3 issues for the Doomsday Hunter Prey and 3 issues for Doomsday Wars. So you get that trade paperback has 7 issues. Different issues, but they talk about the origins in this case of Doomsday, but also the revenge of Superman. The Superman has to go back and has to confront finally Doomsday again, and it's going to be a rematch, and he needs to stop Doomsday for good. That was actually written and created. In this case, the Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey was, I think, done in 1996. So it was 3 years after the fact of the death of Superman. It's not here. It would be nice if for some reason all of these storylines and all these comic books and all the complete comic books are not complete here. Of all the ones that are missing, are all included here. All the stuff that gives you the background. Are we gonna get that at some point? I imagine this is only a reprint of the 20th anniversary, so we don't know what's gonna happen to the 25th anniversary, or maybe on the 30th anniversary, or so on. Of course, this is an industry. People make money. It's a business, so definitely there's always reprints of everything. But so far, for now, this is the most complete. Do I recommend this book? And the answer is very simple. Yes and no. Yes, I recommend this book if you are a fan of this era, the 90s era, Superman. It is a must-read for any Superman fan. It is a must-read for any 90s fan. And if you collect these books, I definitely recommend it. Now, if you want a complete collection, definitely this is not going to it has the majority of the issues, but it's not a complete collection. So on that end, I do recommend the trade paperbacks because they're more complete. They have extra comics that are not included here and explains better things. And also, trade paperbacks tend to be a little cheaper, although right now, because he just reprinted, you can find them for good prices. And I'm going to have links for you if you want to go to Amazon or In Stock Trades. Are actually my favorite place to go and buy books from. But definitely it's not as complete. But also you can do the digital route. That is definitely another way that definitely nowadays I'm a fan of digital comic books. I read a lot of it, and now all of these collections I buy them just for collectible purposes. As a collectible, it is good. As a to read it from it is good also, even though it's missing some areas. If you're familiar with the story, you're definitely you're missing some important parts, but you know what? At least this is the most complete. Hopefully in the future DC decides to create something, or maybe like some people have asked, is to actually have the deluxe version of the trade paperbacks. So maybe that would be a more complete. But for now, this is a really recommended. Now, if you're not a fan of the 90s, this is not going to change your mind or your ideas or your concept of the 90s. It's the same thing as the 90s. If you're not a fan, if you're a younger reader now, you're more in tune with the new stuff, you might find this boring. You might find this lacking the energy that a lot of the new stuff has. Even though I would, you know, probably say the contrary of a lot of the newer stuff nowadays, that like certain energy. But it has to do probably from our point of view, depending on our age group. Once again, thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate you take the time to be here with me and spend the time to watch my videos. Stay tuned for any other video, you know, and thank you for always having patience with me and always, you know, supporting my channel. So thank you once again, and God bless you. I'll talk to you. I'll see you in the next review. See you later, my friends.